If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism.
Okay, so confession. Yes,
Right.
confession.
Yes.
That's maybe the thing that most of my Protestant friends and me all of my life, that was the big deal. What's the big deal about confession? There's all kinds of jokes about confession, and some of them are actually pretty funny.
Right.
But that's the thing that was a mystery to me as a Protestant,
Right.
as a kid, and it's intriguing to me because I just have not known much about it. I've never been in a confessional.
Right.
You know?
Well, I mean, for one thing, it's if you look at the sacraments between sort of Protestant and Catholic, it's the most glaringly, obviously different, right?
Right.
So Protestants, we have, baptism and the Lord's Supper or communion.
Right.
They mean maybe there's different interpretations of them, or so they're sort of kind of executed a little bit different,
Right.
but those are still there. And there's still matrimony might not be a sacrament in the Protestant church, but there is marriages and Christian marriages.
Right.
But the one thing that there's no equivalent to, maybe that's a good way to put it, there's like no equivalent in Protestantism to confession. So it just stands out as this like really different, unique thing.
As a Protestant, I've always been comfortable, maybe a little too comfortable, with keeping my sins just between me and God. That's a cozy little relationship, and it also allows me to lie to myself about what it is I'm doing or how bad it is, or or whatever. And there's something about just saying it out loud and hearing it through another's ears, even if it wasn't a priest. You think, well, okay, really, maybe I can't really explain this very well,
Right.
So it sounds great to me. I mean, I see the benefits. I think that's easy to see, but it's scary.
Yeah.
I find it to be a little scary.
Yeah.
You've talked about to me offline, as we've talked about how you, by the time you got to that point, you were eager to do it, and I understand your points, your reasons for wanting to do that. It's the feeling of being clean, But I didn't understand until recently, when we began talking all about this stuff, that the Catholic Church considers the priest God's representative.
Right.
I just didn't. With the actual authority to bind and loose. Whoa.
Right. No, exactly. And so that's within a larger context of how all of the sacraments, so just say something about that real quick. So in all of the sacraments, the priest operates in persona Christi, which is just the Latin phrase for in the person of Christ.
Right.
So it is not the priest he's not baptizing you with the authority of the priest. He is in the person of Christ, offering you baptism. When the priest consecrates communion and serves that, he's operating in the person of Christ, right? When he performs a wedding, when he anoints somebody. So all of the sacraments, and I used to get this a lot when I was a Protestant or when I was in the process and trying to figure all this out, and hear other Protestants say, well, wait a minute. So you're some guy, you go into some guy and talk to him. And I go, well, of course, now in the Protestant world, you would go to a Christian counselor and say all that, or an accountability group. Right. So their objection that you shouldn't talk to a guy, but you guys talk to guys, your counselor, your accountability group. But the difference is like, well, what authority does he have? And I go, none.
Exactly.
None in and of himself. Other than that, it's no different than the Protestant going in and talking to Pastor Bob or whatever and sharing with Pastor Bob for counseling. But this is what's different here is that when the priest assumes the sacramental role, he is operating in the person of Christ with the authority of the church. And what's important here to remember is that Jesus gives the church, he says, you are Peter, and upon this rock above my church. Right. And what you bind in heaven bind on earth will be bound in heaven. What you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. In other words, the church has the authority to forgive sins and to bind. And that's why, by the way, whenever you see any representations of Peter, like statues or paintings or whatever, he always has the keys. Right. Those are the keys to the kingdom of heaven. So those were given to Peter. And I think that's sort of indisputable from a scriptural standpoint, that he gave to Peter and to the church the ability to sort of bind and loose. Then the church, in a sense, that comes from Christ. That authority is given apostolically to Peter and the church. And then the priest is operating in that capacity. He is the point person, the visible representative, operating in the capacity with the authority that was given to Peter to bind and loose. It is not the priest's authority. No priest will tell you that he has the capacity to forgive you or he has the capacity to do anything. He's simply the representative through which you are speaking with Christ through the authority of Peter.
I had an accountability partner guy one time, and we were out of town at a conference, and we were sharing a motel room. And while we were just chatting late at night after the thing, we're all in bed in our pajamas and everything. And he's very casually flipping channels with the remote, right? And he ran across an R-rated movie, and it's like we both immediately knew that we should just move past this, right? And he just hesitated for a second, and then he clicked. And we kept moving. And I said, it strikes me that whatever we do as accountability people, whatever we do when we're together, it just doesn't count. It doesn't count because hey, we're together and you saw me do it, so I'm good. And that's what is different here. I was reading about a priest. Someone said, if you keep coming back with the same sin every time, the priest is going to say, go away and come back when you're serious. And I thought, whoa, not forgive me? Wait. I've always been told that no matter what I did, God would forgive me and I wouldn't need to worry about offending him. And it brings to mind that quote that do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that's what he reaps.
Right. It's interesting you bring up the accountability partner thing. So way back a number of years ago, I used to work in Christian publishing and consulting and work with Rick Warren a little bit, or Rick Warren's organization. I'll never forget Rick Warren, purpose-driven life guy and all that, talking about this one time. And he was talking about accountability groups, which was all the rage at that time, right? Like you're supposed to have your, Tuesday morning accountability group that meets at Denny's or whatever. And I'll never forget Rick saying, if a guy, suppose a guy cheats on his wife, right? Or he cheats on his taxes. He goes, if you'd lie to your wife, why wouldn't I lie to my accountability group at Denny's? Right? It's like, well, hey, I don't have any problem pulling the wool over my wife's eyes and deceive her, but those guys at Denny's on Tuesday morning, and that bears my soul. So, I mean, the thing is that how do you protect yourself? And I just want to clear this away. Just want to make a quick point about that accountability group thing or the counseling, because this was such a big thing in the Protestant world, the evangelical world, still is to this day. There's this notion that I need to go talk to somebody about all this, but it's sort of for a different purpose. It's to either get advice or validation or whatever. When I go to confession, I'm not going to get counseling. I don't go in there and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this, and then the priest dispenses advice. That's not the point. The point is for me to be able to go before the Lord penitentially, to lay down my sin before the Lord and hear that God forgives me, because the church has the power if I penitentially confess.
Right.
So there's sort of, it's not that evangelicals don't go unburden themselves or don't go spill their guts to their counselor or their accountability partners or whatever. That may be the confession side of it. But what's really important here is to remember that the sacrament, a lot of people call it confession, but it really is confession and reconciliation.
Right.
And a lot of times those terms become interchangeable. A lot of people will they call the sacrament of reconciliation. In fact, the church actually officially calls it the sacrament of penance and reconciliation. Because this is the difference, is when I I can go to a counselor. I can go to my accountability group. I can go to whatever, my AA meeting, and I can spill my guts. I can confess. That's what I do. What I can't receive there is absolution. What I can't receive there is they don't have the power to forgive me.
Right. Which I didn't realize that was what was going on. I remember hearing somewhere along the way that the priest was saying to somebody, your sins are forgiven. And I didn't realize he was in on that to the extent that he was.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah, no. This. I think it's an interesting point that didn't occur to me. But right, so when I was a Protestant pastor, when I was an evangelical minister or whatever, I could stand up and say on Sunday, or I could say to people all the time, "Hey, God forgives you," but I wasn't. I was making a general observation. Right. I would say, hey, based on the gospel and based on scripture, God forgives you. Jesus forgives you for your sins. I wasn't actually, in any case, that wasn't a verb. It was just an observation. I wasn't able to actually tell you you were forgiven,
right,
or pronounce forgiveness or offer you forgiveness. I could just say, hey, in a general way, God forgives everything, so I'm sure he forgives you. But what's different going on here, really the sacrament of reconciliation, is it's exactly that. You're being reconciled with God, and you're being and someone say, well, why can't I just go to God on my own and do it, right? But on your own, you don't have the power of the keys of the kingdom that were given to Peter and to the church. I can just feel forgiven. I think God ought to forgive me. The pastor can say in a sermon in a general way, everybody here is forgiven, like a group thing. But what none of them have, or none of those situations do you have, is the capacity to say someone with authority, spiritual authority, is able to pronounce declarative to you, to actually absolve you. And that's what happens when you go into the confessional and you confess your sins and you make a good confession and you commit to there's the act of confession, which you say these are my sins and I'm sorry for them. The priest is able to save you by the power of Christ. I absolve you. I standing as a representative of Christ with the power of the church given through Peter, I pronounce that you are absolved of your sins. And that's what I can't hear from a counselor. I can't hear that from my accountability partners. I can't hear that from really anybody.
I remember feeling that, talking to a Christian counselor, the feeling that don't you dare let me off the hook.
Right.
I'm not here to feel better. Right. I'm here because this is bothering me, and it's going to bother me until it's settled. And if there's something I need to do, then you need to hold my feet to the fire. I'm giving you $80 an hour.
For that,
I could be drinking and forgetting my problems, but I'm not. I'm here, and I want to get past this.
Right. But in the end, what did that counselor have the capacity to actually say to you? It could give you advice, but that counselor never had the capacity to tell you you were forgiven. The counselor could say, just like in an AA group, go and find the person that you offended, and that person could say, I forgive you for my part. Mm-hmm. But of course, none of them can forgive your sin and pronounce you absolved from sin before God. There's only, in all of Scripture, the only capacity that's ever addressed for that is when Jesus says to Peter, and through the church, you have the power to bind and loosen the keys to the kingdom. Mm-hmm. And that's the unique power of the church.
So we've talked about Chesterton before, and I had not read much of him until the last year or so. And I found his essay, Why I Am a Catholic, which I thought was a wonderful title. And I just read this the other day. He said Catholicism is the only thing that really prevents a sin from being a secret. And so this approach to me seems to be much more sober than the approach I'm used to. Ed, this is serious. This is your soul we're talking about here. This is God. It isn't like he missed that thing that you did. and didn't see, went over his head and he wasn't looking and you got away with it. Either you're going to fix this and deal with it or you're not. But the way I've lived my Christian life, it was pretty easy to do that. It was easy to say, well, hey, I'm really sorry, God. I mean, I know I shouldn't have done that. But there wasn't any bite in it. It didn't have any teeth.
Well, I mean, right. I mean, you could be sorry and you should be, right. And a lot of us, I think, generally are. I mean, as a Protestant, I think that I'm going to come back to this issue, the two halves to this thing. The sacrament actually is, in a sense, the sacrament of reconciliation, because confession is what I do. So think of it like baptism. I come forward to the baptismal font, but the actual act of regenerating me in baptism is done by the priest or the pastor, whoever, right? By Christ through them, the Holy Spirit through them. The same thing with communion, even in the Protestant church. I come forward for communion, but the act of me coming forward isn't what affects a change in me. It is through the bread and the wine. I have community with Christ. I've made one. So the confession part is me being sorrowful and saying it out loud. Right. That's not the part that's efficacious.
Okay.
And so to Chesterton's point about being a secret, you can feel bad about this all day long. You can every morning. I had things when I was a Protestant for years and years and years. I would just endlessly pray to God. I'm so sorry for this. I'm so sorry for this. I'm so sorry for this. I'm sorry for this. I'm so sorry for this. I'm sorry for this.
Right.
Well, I couldn't, when I was in my process of becoming Catholic, and wait to finally go and be finally released from that, from feeling bad and from feeling sorry. And so by going into the confessional for the first time and being able to say, these are the things that I'm sorry for, and to hear Christ's representative through the church be able to say to me, you are absolved. It's over. It's done. Let it go. That was one of the things. Chesterton had another line about confession. He said, the thing is when you go in and you receive absolution in confession, reconciled, he said, you walk out like a child.
I was just thinking of that one. He said, I made a note here. When a Catholic comes from confession, he does truly, by definition, step out again into that dawn of his own beginning.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that line.
Yeah.
I love that feeling of being clean and a clean slate.
Yeah. I mean, it's because we're talking here. We had made some notes for our conversation, but I wrote that one down too. And it says that, he says, Chesterton says, when you come out of confession, the accumulations of time can no longer terrify. You may be gray and gouty, but you're only 5 minutes old.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that's missing. It's not that I can't feel sorry for my sin. It's that I never get released from it. And that's the reconciliation, absolution part of it. I literally could not do this without you, because this show is 100% listener supported. There are no ads, no sponsors. So if the episodes are helping you to understand the faith, to answer your questions, or draw you closer to historic Catholic Christianity, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra conversations, video Q&As, deep dives, live streams, behind the scenes, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. Together, we're educating, equipping, and exciting people about the beauty of the Catholic faith.
This brings up to me, this may be another whole conversation, but that my conversion is an ongoing thing, and not, my understanding of it always was that I pray the sinner's prayer, Jesus forgives my sins, and then as I've heard you say, my ticket is punched, and I just need to, try to do my best and follow, try to become more, pray to become more Christ-like and so forth. And in the Catholic Church, they talk about, I'm reading the Catechism, you suggested some passages, and they talked about, grave sins and being disconnected from God. And that's a new thought to me, that I am constantly working out my salvation, and I'm constantly being converted. They talked about conversion, and I'm constantly being converted and washed clean. And
okay, so it's real important here for anybody who's listening who's a Protestant to make sure we are really precise with our language here, because this is the thing that Protestants and Catholics have been fighting about for 500 years. It's caused endless amounts of arguments in my life. Held me back from Catholicism. And there are still Protestants I know that we both know that are like, oh my gosh, you can't become Catholic because of blah, 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 blah. Right. So there's all this misunderstanding swirling around this point. I want to make sure our language is super, super clear. So all Christians, Catholic, Protestant, everything, and Catholic, it isn't like Catholics came up with this. They were the original church, right?
Right.
There is salvation. And what Protestants have charged is that Catholics think they have to keep doing things to get saved. That's not true. Never has been, never will be. We're saved once and for all. The salvation that we receive is from Jesus Christ's death and resurrection. He dies on a cross in our place, right? And rises again to make it possible for us to do that. We're united with him in our baptism, in communion. We are united in the death and resurrection. That is salvation. And as Protestants will say over and over again, the gospel is that, that Jesus takes your place. That's true. But this word conversion is an interesting word, okay? Because think about what the word means. I'm converting something from one thing to another. I am being made from one thing into another. I may be saved, okay, but I haven't been remade. So here's like a really stupid analogy. Okay, suppose that you're like into classic cars, right? And you buy this like epic classic car. Like I used to have the 67 Camaro when I was younger, right? And I go out to the junkyard, I find the old 67 Camaro and I buy it. I pay for it. I now own it. I have the pink slip on it. I got a guy in a trailer who drops it off in my garage, my barn. I now own that, but it's not been converted or remade to be all cherry so I can go drive around, to get ice cream on Saturday afternoon, right? That is a process of remaking it, tearing out all the old rotten parts, whatever, sanding out all the rust, replacing the parts. That process of converting that, restoring that, is a long, complicated process, and it takes effort. Now, if we apply it to ourselves, there is actually a Greek word, and when I was a Protestant, when I was in seminary, it was pounded into us over and over. It was a word from Paul, metanoia. Metanoia, it's change of mind. It's a conversion of our mind, our heart, right? Our spirit. So in salvation, Catholics, the same as Protestants, don't believe there's anything I do to earn my salvation. But I have to work at converting my life. I have to work at that metanoia, that change of mind. Sometimes it's called sanctification. There's salvation and becoming holy. And that is a long, hard process. And that is something that we have to work at. That is not earning our salvation, but it is working out our salvation to become saints.
So I have a question along that line. It occurred to me on my way here. So if I sin and I don't confess it, am I not forgiven? And there's part two, hang on. And if so, have I lost my salvation? Because then it seems to me like I could be sort of flickering in and out of salvation all the time. Like I'd want a priest on speed dial so that if I found something in myself, I can get rid of it right away because I don't want to. That doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right to me. But it seems. But I get a sense of that a little bit when I read through the Catechism.
Right. Okay. So let's make a couple quick distinctions. Here's what partly is going on in sin, and to answer your issue. Grave sin, okay, what's sometimes called mortal sin, is mortal sin because it is a grave matter, right? I mean, it's a serious matter, and it is something that you do with full intention, okay? You may hate that you're doing it, but you do it,
right?
And there is an act of will involved with doing it, right? You don't commit grave sins accidentally. there is an act of will. You may feel conflicted and tortured. I wish I wouldn't do this terrible thing, but I'm going to do it anyway. So what it does is it creates a rupture in your relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
It creates a rupture in your relationship with Christ. It's a wedge that drives you further away from God.
Mm-hmm.
The same way, just think of it with your wife or your children or whoever in your life, that you say, hey, if I lie to them or I beat them or I do something like that, I'm fracturing that communion. And there has to be a restoration. If I live in this thing of sort of rebellion in that relationship, fracturing in that relationship. So when it comes to sin, it's not a matter of like keeping score. And, priests will tell you that, the people who come into the confessional with a score list,
right.
I did this and I did this and I did this and this, and now I'm not saved anymore. That's not the point. But when we sort of persist in doing things that fracture our communion and our relationship
mm-hmm.
with Christ, those are things that have to be worked through in that relationship the same way with anything else. If I am intentionally and willfully doing things that gravely impact my devotion to Christ,
mm-hmm.
that's something that needs to be reconciled. And I can't reconcile that with a counselor or an accountability, because the relationship I've fractured is my relationship with Christ.
Right.
So who is it that I can be reconciled with? The only person I can, because the issue is being reconciled with Jesus. And the only way I can be reconciled with Jesus is to approach someone who, in a sense, speaks in his place, or in that moment,
mm-hmm.
operates in his place and says, yes, on behalf of Christ, I say, look, Lord, I've done this terrible thing. I've turned away from you. I've turned my back on you. I don't want to do that anymore. And then the priest in persona Christi can say, if you've turned your face back towards me, I can say that I'm reconciled with you, or you're reconciled with Christ. And so that's what it is. So to your point about, this list of, can I lose my, am I going down do I have to have the priest on speed dial because every day I'm doing something, wrong? That's this obsession, and priests will tell you this obsession with what they call venial sin, which is small things. I accidentally went 5 miles over the speed limit today, and and I did this and I did that, and I had all these little things. Those aren't rupturing of your communion with God. But I think we all know, and we can all think of our mind of things that we have done willfully that we're turning away from God. And those are the things that are the mortal sins that we confess.
And I can see that if you regularly come and talk to the priest in the confessional and go through the process, that you'll just be always, you'll be far more aware of it.
Yeah.
It would be easy. It's just, it just makes the whole thing a little more serious.
Yeah. I mean, in another conversation, we can get into this whole thing that is often misunderstood, the difference between mortal and venial sin. But let me just put it this way. There are things that we know that we do that are wrong. I was driving to work and I drove too fast. I drove over the speed limit. That was probably not a good thing It was not a good thing to do, but it wasn't in a willful or intentional turning away from God, unless I decided, I'm just going to, drive 120 miles an hour past the school to, whatever, in which case, it would be a rupture of my charity and concern and all that. But it's not keeping this list of every little thing that I did wrong, because I'm going to go through the day and do all kinds of things that are wrong.
Right.
But this is a super important point that we haven't talked about, is that when we do confession, before we go into confession, actually we should be doing it every day, is we do something called an examination of conscience. Mm-hmm. So, people have different ways to do it. They have a journal, they have a this, that. There's checklists you can look at. What I do is in my phone, and one of my notes section thing in my phone, I have one that's like password protected. Right. And just when I go, the day before I go to confession, I kind of think back on however many weeks or how long since my last confession, I kind of go through and I think about the things where I think I've kind of willfully turned my face away from God. And I kind of have a little note list in there. The funny thing is I can kind of copy and paste from the last time, because a lot of times it's the same things that I keep on doing. And it's like, I just and then I go in and I say those. I don't go through the whole list of every time I drove over the speed limit, but I come in and I say, hey, this thing, I know that I wish I would stop doing this, or this, I willfully sort of turned away from God in this. Right. And those are the things that the priest wants to hear me confess?
It occurred to me then, I know we got to wrap this up, but it occurred to me that I found this in myself, and it made me laugh. I think I might have laughed out loud thinking about this, that this just seems like serious buzzkill. And I thought, it felt like, oh man, this is, that they're just piling on all these rules. I found that in myself, and I thought, I think I'm mistaking the freedom of a confessed and reconciled life for chains that hamper my freedom. But the more I thought about it, I thought, well, why wouldn't I want to be free to be reconciled with God? That seems like the greatest freedom ever.
Right. I mean, isn't this the thing, this a misunderstood idea of freedom, right? So like modern man, we have a notion that freedom is doing whatever you want, being able to do whatever you want to do, right? The ancient Jewish and Christian concept of freedom is not being shackled and chained to things. And the thing is attachments to sin, attachments to other things are things that sort of shackle you and chain you. And this is why, it's a very ancient idea that if you look at, say, the 10 Commandments, what they really are is the 10 Commandments don't tie me down. The 10 Commandments keep me from being tied down. I always thought of it, it's like if you're driving along a mountain highway and there are these signs like cliff over here, right? All these like warning signs, don't swerve over here. Here are the guardrails. And if you don't pay attention to like the curve signs and all this kind of stuff, you're going to go off the guardrail. And in a sense, the 10 Commandments or God's commandments are things that actually give us freedom, because freedom is being able to go down the road without driving off the cliff or getting stuck in the snow. And so what we are trying to do is avoid those things that tie us down. And that's what sin is. It pulls us away from God. And freedom is being able to enjoy fully who God made us to be and the life he offers us. So, yeah, I mean, the confessional is a thing that is often misunderstood, but it really is profound. And like I said, when I was in my process of becoming Catholic, it was the sacrament I couldn't wait to do, because in a sense, it was the one thing, that I'd never been able to do in my life up to that point. Mm-hmm. And I always there's a moment in which you feel this reluctance because you have to go in there. But like Chesterton said, I walk out and I go, why didn't I do this sooner? Again, another thing too is I can't speak for other people, but I can speak for myself, that knowing that I'm going to have to confess it often is a way it puts a check on my behavior. Yeah. Because I do this thing I know I shouldn't do, but oh my gosh, in a couple of weeks, I'm gonna have to go in and confess it. No, that's going to be just like, I don't want to do that. Right. Like that's not the priest, but it's kind of embarrassing and I'm sort of ashamed of myself. And like, I don't want to do that anymore. But that's that process of converting my life. Right. That's that process of conversion, of metanoia, of change of life, of sanctification. What freedom is there other than the freedom to be in a relationship with God? There isn't any other freedom, I think, that has any meaningful definition at all. Right. Well, look at people we know, right? Look at people in our lives. When you look at people who sort of live, I want to do whatever I want to do, so often what ends up happening is they end up becoming slaves to something. They're becoming slaves to whatever it is, money, drugs, this, that, whatever. I mean, you pick your thing, narcissism, whatever. But, it strikes me that even counseling or psychotherapy is going in there trying to figure out how to liberate myself from all the junk and all the messes I've made in my life. And how much better is it if I can avoid making those messes and being free to. But again, that's still a therapeutic model, and the confessional isn't therapy. I remember one time I hadn't been a Catholic for very long, and I went into, I was actually in another town and I was traveling. And so I went into confession because I had it on a Wednesday night. I was happy to be in town. And so I find this church and I go in and I go to the confessional. I had my whole phone notes and I started going all this stuff. And I kind of guess I must have gone off on a tangent about things that I was really struggling with. And then the priest, sitting on the other side of the little curtain there, says to me, this is, now we're getting into like counseling and spiritual direction. And that's like, I've got like 27 people in a line outside.
Right.
So can you just get to the things that you want to bring before the Lord and confess? And if you want to go get counseling, then that's a different thing, you know? And that's why when we do go in the confessional, it's, you know, number and kind and number, kinder and number. I mean, the priest doesn't want to hear you necessarily, you know, rattle off everything like a counseling session, but it's these are the ways that I have turned away from God.
Right. Yep.
Since the last time I was absolved, I was absolved of my sin. And then since then, these are the ways I've turned my face away from Christ. And I want to be reconciled with Jesus. So this is, by the way, this conversation we're having, it's coming up to Lent here and Ash Wednesday.
Right.
So this is a great opportunity because that's the season, 40 days in which the church celebrates but practices penance and confession.
We'll be back with another episode very soon. And this show is 100% listener supported. My patrons keep the lights on, and they let me spend more time researching and recording so that these episodes keep coming. If this show has helped you, would you consider becoming a patron? For as little as $5 a month, you'll get every regular episode organized into topical playlists, plus exclusive bonus content, extra video Q&As, deep dive courses, live streams, and more. Just head to patreon.com/considering Catholicism or tap the link in the show notes. And would you please rate the podcast on whatever platform you're using and write a review on Apple Podcasts or on consideringcatholicism.com. And you can drop me a line. Patrons can comment directly on Patreon posts or Spotify. I read every one. Or you can always use the contact form at consideringcatholicism.com, or you can email me at consideringcatholicism@gmail.com. I love hearing your questions, your comments, and your stories.